so that we can have an introduction to Hasidism, which is public. So, okay, so today I will introduce Hasidism. Oh my God. Yes, it's not my season, like I said.
Be careful to be able to call the ambulance straight away.
Thank you. We'll have to cut that out of the recording. Very weird at the beginning. Okay, so Hasidism, now we're moving. We were in the 17th century with Spinoza. And it is really, it's funny because it's still the continuity of Spinoza while being in conflict with Spinoza. So it's a kind of love-hate relationship. You have the same theme of joy that's going to come up again, like you were pointing out to me. But you have a backlash against rationalism, and we're going to understand why, right? This is now really the 18th century here. This is the beginning of existentialism also in Western Europe, also in the West, right? We know that existentialism has deeper roots than the West, right? The mentality of existentialism I mentioned has deeper roots, has roots in the Hebrew Bible, and on and so forth. Right? So we've been following this, I guess, this route, right? But now we're entering the 18th, and we're seeing alongside the Jewish strand of existentialism, there is a new strand going to come out, which is the Western version, right? Which I'll be alluding to. Well, I'll mention Kierkegaard, Nietzsche today, and you'll see some connections there. So with 18th century, we have mostly a shift from medieval to modern, right? Medieval perspective was very religious. Everything had a reason, and it was a divine reason, right? We believe that, you know, God was in charge of the universe, and everything that we did was supposed to be in obedience to this God, right? And so forth. Now with the pre-modern era, like Spinoza, even Maimonides, you start to see a movement away from that, right? Remember, Maimonides is saying, God is not in control, we are, right? We need to find a way out ourselves of suffering, right? We can't ask for miracles anymore. So already Maimonides was a pre-modern, right? We often don't realize that, right? And then Spinoza, of course, hyper-modern, right? We don't even need God anymore, or at religion, let's say, we still need God, but we don't need religion anymore. We can access directly through a shift of perspective, right? As you seek knowledge, you become more of a receptacle, right, for the divine joy. So we have, right, so we have been moving away from the medieval view, which was a religious view, but now even more so, right, with the rise of science, right? So with the rise of science, something shifts in the psyche of the West, right? Something shifts in the sense that now we realize we don't need we don't need to ask God for favors. We can figure things out by ourselves, right? We don't need to do a rain dance. If there is rain, we can use, you know, technology in order to create irrigation system, wells, and so forth. We don't need, right, to depend on God anymore. We can solve our own problems. If there is a plague, right, we don't need to pray for God to you know, take the plague away. We can, through medicine, and we can do research and figure this out and heal ourselves, right? So with science, we come more and more to what scholars have called the disenchantment of the world. It's a really important concept. Disenchantment, that's a big word on the board. Okay. The world took half the board. Okay. Disenchantment of the world, right? Or if you prefer, the demystification. Right. And this, I'm quoting these two terms because you will see them over and over again in the Western existentialists, right? Gabriel Marcel talks of disenchantment, right? Emmanuel Levinas also. So this is really something which is happening, in which the existentialists are going to grapple with, right? So we have this disenchantment, meaning the world is not enchanted anymore. What does it mean to be enchanted? Those Harry Potter fans, yes.
In awe of an external world.
Okay, exactly, right? You sense that in the world there is more, right? There is a mystery surrounding us, or there is a higher intelligence, or there is, you know, God is moving in the world, right? Somehow, or within us. So disenchantment is that God goes back where he belongs. Right? There's no more need for God anymore, because we are now understanding the laws of nature, and with that understanding comes power, right? Spinoza, right? Nietzsche also, Foucault, all of them are saying this. As we understand, we become more and more empowered, and we can basically, we don't need this external power anymore because we have become empowered, right? Through knowledge. So we don't need to rely on God to fix anything for us. So, and we also realize that more and more, there's no more mystery. We can explain these things that were unexplainable, right? So two things, right? On the one hand, we don't need God because we are empowered. We can fix our problems ourselves. On the other hand, anything that was, still beyond our reach intellectually, or anything that was mysterious, is also now being sidelined by the hopes of science. Eventually, scientists say, eventually we will understand this, right? Eventually we'll have clarity. So there's now no more mystery, no more wonder, no more sense of something that we cannot grasp. Even Maimonides was humble enough to say there are limits to what I can know, right? 18th century, there are no more limits, right? If you want, the keyword for the 18th century is limitless, like the movie. Have you seen it? Right, very good, right? This is the keyword of the 18th century. We can do anything and we can understand everything. That's the mentality. It was very, very optimistic, right? A little bit arrogant too, right? So we have this, and so because we either understand everything or will, and because we don't need God anymore, we don't need this. The world has become completely disenchanted. There's no more enchantment, no more mystery, right? No more mystique, right? Everything is clear, under our control. It's just matter that we can possess, right? The world becomes reduced to materiality, and there is no more spirit flowing in the world anymore. And this is people like Buber, people like Marcel are going to really denounce this, right? So make sure you write this down, that the world in a way has become pure materiality, pure matter. There is no spirit anymore, right? Except reason. There is reason, but there's no spirit, right? In the sense of something divine, holy, right? There's no divinity, no holiness. In other words, no mystery, right? That's what we all mean by the realm of spirit, right? The realm of mystery, the realm of the divine, the realm of holiness. All of this has been sucked out of the universe, right? And so we sink back into pure matter. And that is a state, a mindset, right? Which, according to Buber, who we will study next, is very dangerous, right? If everything is pure matter, well, let me ask you, how is it dangerous to have, in a way, drained the world of spirit and everything now is pure matter? We are pure matter. The buildings are pure matter. Nature is pure matter. What happens? What have we lost? Let's see.
Well,
can anticipate. Yes.
You could argue life, like the laws of human life, is kind of not very different from like breaking furniture.
Yeah, so it's the same, exactly. So you're agreeing, right, that everything is pure matter. But what are we losing the process of disenchanting the world? There's so Namgyal and then Sarkisian.
Really hand, but I'm thinking even to make cases like to say that matter is connected to another kind of matter requires some idea of like force, and oftentimes maybe like phenomenologists will like see this force as coming from like a desire or some kind of like some kind of internal self, right? And this internal self is not merely physical, it cannot be reducible. And so when we claim that all things are matter, we have this, what this entails is perhaps a loss of this internality, right?
Very good, right? That we have lost in a way the subject, right? If we're just matter, then there's no psyche. There is no soul, right? Why would there be a psyche or soul? We just have a brain and neurons and connections, right? What is this, right? So at the same time that we disenchant the world, we disenchant ourselves, right? We also, so yeah, no spirit means no soul, right? No interiority, because we are just molecules, right? And synapses and brain power, right? So in a way, we lose something that used to be essential to our humanity, which is our soul, which is our, something deeper, right? Something is spiritual. We have lost that too in the process. So what's the danger of losing that, of this loss of this dimension? What's the danger of sinking? And by the way, a lot of philosophers are saying this, right? We are pure matter. If you look into philosophy of mind right now, they're discussing this, right? Are we pure matter, or is there a je ne sais quoi that is more, right? And there's a big debate, right? But what Buber is going to point out is that this is deeply problematic, this idea that we're pure matter. Yes. So we still have purpose, but it's not really, no, you're right. There's surviving. Yes, you're existing. You don't have anything that will lead you beyond just the instinct of, and so forth. I mean, even, you can look at even, yeah, so you lose purpose is even more danger. Yes. And then
maybe I wouldn't, I think you can still have like, you would, even in like a case of materiality, you would have some telos. I think like the telic property is not like necessary. So it could be purposive. I'd be interested in like forms of contemplation, reflection, which would then be indicative of some sense of being when we contemplate our purpose, not so much the presence of purpose for the sake of purpose.
Okay, just so yeah, I mean, there's a debate, right? That materiality, you can still have purpose and so forth, but and this is, a bit like a caricature, right? But I think the question is legitimate. If everything is matter, if we're nothing more than just atoms, and so everything around us also, then what is the danger? Let me hear you on this. That's what Buber will say, right? Very good, right? Buber, who's coming next, is going to say, if everything is matter, then why should we protect humanity more than we protect the table? I can, axe down the table, no problem. I can also axe down Sarkisian over here. If he's like a table, who cares, right? And so there is a problem, at least according to Buber, that if we lose the realm of the spirit, there's nothing in us that we need to protect that is sacred. There's no more sacred, right? And if there's no more sacred, everything is up for grabs, right? I can just come and take you and use you and throw you in a war and then throw you in a factory. And you do, there's nothing really that needs to be protected. That is higher, that is worth of our, how shall I put it, protection or guardian, guard. So if there's just materiality, there's nothing basically, and that's what Buber will say. If there's no spirit when it comes to human beings, if human beings are mere matter, I can then control them like I control the bricks of this building or the electricity. People become a means to an end, which if you're familiar with Immanuel Kant, this was the danger that we're falling into as we are disenchanting the world, that people become just means to an end. They become just manpower versus being something specifically different, right? Yes. Exactly, there's no more value because everything is the same. Everything is, and what is matter? Matter is that upon that we can control and manipulate, right? So if everything is matter, that was the ancient Greek definition. I don't know if you recall, right? We're using Greek concepts. You have matter and you have form. That's the basic elements of the universe. You always have matter. So the table is whatever this is, wood, maybe, congealed wood. And then you have the form of the table, right? And these two put together make the world of objects. So matter was always that upon which we inflict the form, right? So knowing this, if everything is matter, then everything can be controlled. Everything can be possessed. Everything can be manipulated, including human beings. And that is a problem, right? Yes.
I'll say there's potentially a transcendent property for matter also. There's an interesting note when you look into like certain people who have this idea, let's say that consciousness is illusionary, right? And some of the early quantum physicists, right, there's like Schrodinger, them, right, when they were investigating the stuff and they were seeing, in their opinion, it seemed like ultimate reality seemed like more of a thought than actual just,
Exactly. So you raise a really good point. This is 18th century science, right? When you come to the 21st century, more and more we are reverting that everything is spirit, right? More and more we are, I mean, if you look some of the, some of the theories of quantum mechanics, it's looking more and more like everything is energy, right? Or you could say, argue spirit, right? And that matter is made up of energy, that actually we are complete spiritual beings but the spirit has condensed in certain places to make our bodies. So now we're flipping, right? They say it's the age of Aquarius. It's not for nothing, right? Here we are. Everything is spirit. So, but at the time, right, they were over here, right? And maybe because of the backlash, right, of the existentialists, well, not science is on its own, but it's interesting that it coincides, right? You have the 20th century philosophers who are arguing for this, and then at the same time, science is pushing forward until we have today the opposite notion, right? So good point, Sarkisian. So, okay, so you're saying, right, by the way, this has impact even with environmental philosophy, right? If you're into that, if everything is matter and there's no soul to the universe, then I can do what I want with the universe. I can control it, like form controls matter. And this is, I think, this could be a basis for environmental ethics, is to realize that spirit, it permeates beyond the human being, permeates all natural beings, right? And so in a way, we ought to also protect and respect and give rights to nature, right? So there's a trend nowadays, right, to say that, you know, it's not just us who have this spark of divinity, it's all of nature, and we ought to respect nature as we respect human beings, right? So this sinking of everything into materiality, including the natural world, is dangerous both for us and for the environment, right? And that's why in Buber, you'll see later a text, and I always wondered what this text, so weird moment where he's talking about a tree and going on and on about this tree, and I'm like, what are you saying? so I usually skip that part, but now I'm starting to see, right? He's actually saying, right? Let's try to see even the natural world in this way, right? Namgyal.
Oh, I was gonna say, it's also influential in contemporary political theory. So Arendt in the Trial of Eichmann noticed how Eichmann used Kant's like moral imperative. Oh, you see, I was really, I was universalizing this maxim, but what you misunderstood, right, was the type of respect that we have to have. And so she noted that those in totalitarian regimes, there's a quick degradation of individuals with identities to masses. And so she uses this term, like the matter, pure matter.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. We should invite Hannah Arendt into the class too, right? Along with all these guys. No, I mean in terms of obviously, in terms of the content, right? I've been trying to see if I could find some Jewish woman to, and I had such a hard time, but maybe Arendt would be the one. Although I see her more as a sociologist or political theorist more than a philosopher. But yeah, no, that,
Jewish female philosopher.
yes, why don't I just step in? It's okay, good. So that's a really good point, right? So Hannah Arendt also notices the materialization of humanity, right, into masses that we can just, send to war or make into a workforce, right, that produces for the state. Okay, so you're getting the picture, right? And so as a result, right, of this materiality, and philosophers have made a connection, there's a rise in not only despair, but violence, right? Oh, you could argue there's always been despair and violence, but it becomes particularly acute, right? It becomes particularly acute in the 20th century, right? Like, as you have these political regimes that emerge and that are considering that everything is matter, right? So that's for Buber. I'll leave it for Buber. He's the one talking about that. But in the 18th century, right, you have therefore the disenchantment of the world, and you have also a rise of political violence, especially where these guys are situated, these Hasidim. This is in mostly Poland, right? Poland, Ukraine is where you find most of them, right? And at the time, right, alongside with the scientific progress, you also have, in a way, political upheaval, right? Where you have, especially where these guys that we're going to study were situated, you had still a kind of a feudal system. You had peasants who worked for some lords, and there was a rebellion, right? They had been oppressed for too long, and a war started between the peasants and the overlords. And the Jews were caught in the middle. They were also peasants, right? But they were also caught in the middle of that war. And so things deteriorated, not only politically, but socially. The result of that war, as with every war, was wretchedness, poverty, famine, and so forth. And so you had, right, obviously, the whole country was, destroyed. But you had these Jewish communities, which were even more, right, traumatized by the war. And so the result became that they lived in dire poverty, right? These were communities who were extremely poor. There was a lot of wretchedness and poverty there and despair. But also at the same time, what they did to react is they closed up on themselves, right? And notice our theme is opening, right? The opening up. And here you have the opposite, right? They close up on themselves. And so what these communities started to do is they became very insulated with regards to the rest of the world, right? That was the first thing they did. And then within themselves, they became extremely it's a kind of OCD, I think, intellectual OCD. They became, because, once everything is crazy outside, you want to have something that's secure, and they made learning that security. But then they took it too far. Right? Learning became the only path to God, right? So I don't know, any of you OCD a little bit like me? You see, I'm OCD because I need straight rows, right? Anybody have struggled with this a little bit?
Whole
Okay.
family.
So, okay, great. So usually it's when you grow up in a chaotic environment, and then so you have to have something, everything has to be aligned and nice, so you can feel secure in that environment. And so the Jews at the time, because they were surrounded by chaos and violence, they retreated in the houses of study, right? And made learning the pillar, made learning the security, and took it too far, according to the Hasidic rabbis, so that now only learning could get you to God, right? It became very elitist, very intellectualized, and Judaism became, I think, overly intellectual, right? So that's the situation that happens. So on the one hand, you have disenchantment of the world, darkness everywhere. And then you have the Jews kind of recoiling on themselves and hanging on to learning for dear life in order to survive the chaos, right? By the way, how many of you are familiar with the paintings of Chagall? Still later, but anybody? Yes, one, that's it, really? One person? Okay. Marc Chagall is a painter who came from Eastern Europe, Jewish painter, moved to Paris. I think it's the 20th century, but if you look at his paintings, it's very interesting because he's really able to express the darkness of those times. His paintings have that element of darkness, and then they have that element of light, which for him is always coming from the body of his muse, right? His wife was his muse. So he's always, all those paintings have this chaos, this darkness, and then his wife is there somewhere, right, with him, and out of her body is coming out light, right? So he's playing he's the Rembrandt of Judaism. Anybody know Rembrandt? You know Rembrandt, right? Okay, so he's basically the Rembrandt of Judaism. He's able to play on light in the same way that Rembrandt was able to juxtapose darkness and light. I don't know if you've seen paintings of Rembrandt, but I have never met someone who can paint light. Have you? I mean, he's amazing. He actually paints light, and it's a very peculiar light. And Chagall is very similar. He's able to paint this darkness and this light. But if you focus on the darkness in Chagall's paintings, you get a sense of what these people were going through politically and also spiritually, right? Okay, so it's an era of intense darkness where people are just hanging on to the study in order to survive. And in a way, what happened is that God and faith and the spiritual realm became even more far away from the ordinary person who couldn't study, who didn't have time to study, right? So you had Jewish communities where only a handful of learned people had this source of security through learning. But what about all the other wretches who were, taking care of their cows and their sheep and, doing different trades, had no time for learning? They usually were left in pits of darkness and despair, right? And so this is there that the Hasidic movement was born, in that context. Okay, so let me say it again. It's a context where there is political and spiritual darkness. It's the same, political and spiritual darkness. And you have the backlash or the reaction from the Jewish communities is to just become even more focused on learning and a rigid keeping of the law, right? So you had the law and the learning became the kind of safe, how do you call it? When you jump off a boat and you have these little boats?
Lifesaver.
What? Lifeboats, yes. They became lifeboats, right? A very diligent keeping of the law and a very lot of time spent in study. These were the lifeboats, right? Spiritual lifeboats. So it makes a lot of sense. If you're OCD, you understand what happened, right? Obviously, right? They would need the lifeboat, and the lifeboat is best when you have clear laws that you're doing or you're studying in the house of study and hanging on to that. But the problem with this is that most people didn't have time to study, and also most people couldn't keep all those laws because of the heavy responsibilities of life, right? And so out of this come the Hasidic movement, the Hasidic rabbis, and they're going to, in a way, what their main contribution will be in a way to bring God back down, right? God had become too much of a faraway thing, right? That you can only attain through diligent study and diligent keeping of the commandments, and most people could not reach that. And so what they did is they brought how do I put it? they democratized. Is that a word? Thank you. Democratized. Democratized God, right? They in a way brought God back down. So we'll see how they did that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that right now. So what's very interesting, I've been reading the text, right, on that I assigned you, because I'm discovering this alongside with you. But what I'm noticing, what can be noticed as you read these stories, right, because that's all we have left from these guys, is the focus on joy, right? So we're back to Spinoza, right? Even Maimonides was talking about that. So the core, right, the essence of the teaching is joy. And there's two paths to this joy, right? And that's what I'm seeing over and over again in those stories. So I'm gonna write it down here. So the core teaching is joy. And there are two ways, right, to awaken that joy. And we're going to ask also, why joy? Right? Why is that so important? Why is that going to save the community, right? Which is sinking in darkness. So first of all, first thing about joy is the ability to see the holy in the profane. So it's a vision. I'm going to explain all this. Right? We live in a world, remember, that has been disenchanted. What the Hasidic rabbis are going to do is re-enchant the world. That's the first thing they're going to do. So let me say that again, right? Remember, we live in a world that has been disenchanted. Everything is pure materiality. First step that they're going to take in order to salvage the situation and pull the people out of despair is to re-enchant the world. They're going to say, actually, God is everywhere, right? We just don't see him. And we have to develop the vision so that we can begin to see God in the most mundane things and the mundane situations and mundane encounters, right? God is not only has God not flown back into the heavens, he's not either captive in the house of study. God is as you're tending the fire. God you can find as you're having conversation. You can find as you're spending time with your spouse, right? So they have re-enchanted the world. That's the first thing they will do. They will re-enchant the world. By the way, they're not the only ones to do that, right? All of the existentialists are going to take a similar step. What's his name? Schopenhauer, right, is going to say something similar. Nietzsche is going, Gabriel Marcel is going to very much work in the direction of re-enchanting the world, right? Finding that we need to reconnect with the mystery that surrounds us, right? It never left, we just stopped seeing it, right? Because we were so obsessed with science. So they re-enchant the world. And so what we need to develop, what they're going to teach us is a new vision. How to begin to see within the world the divine encounters, the divine moments, right? Divine moments that occur in the most mundane tasks and in the most mundane encounters, right? So notice how the average, right, peasant, because that's who they're dealing with, who doesn't have time to study the Torah, who doesn't have time, who cannot keep all of the commandments because they're so busy, they can now just milking the cow, right? They can have a God moment, right? Just talking to their friend. So we're going to see how that works, right? But that's very important first step that these Hasidic rabbis are going to take, very daring step against a subversive step against the dominant culture of the time, which was to disenchant the world, right? Second thing they're going to do, and of course, joy, right, is the ability to see that, right? If you see the holy in the profane, this is going to awaken joy, obviously, right? This is connected to joy. Second thing, though, it's not enough to see it, you have to begin to draw it out, right? So we can also, this is also the ability to draw it out, to draw the holy or the divine, right, out of the profane. So it's as though God is hiding in the world, right? Or God is bound by the world, right? Bound by materiality. But we have the power to release him, right? We have the power to release the divine into the world through certain actions. This is certain actions. It's not a vision anymore, right? This is action. So this here is a vision. This here is an action, right? So in addition to that, right, we can release God back into this disenchanted world. We can release God who has been bound by matter, right? God is hiding, or it's trapped, you could say. God is trapped in matter, and we have the ability to release that divine light through certain key actions, which, by the way, have nothing to do with religious or ritual actions. This is, again, daily actions. The peasant can do this all day long, right? What? Deed, a deed. Right? So even the most ignorant peasant, notice ignorant, right? We're moving away from Maimonides here, right? Because here, any idiot can do this, right? For Maimonides, remember, only the elite can, have, the rest are trapped in despair and suffering. You have to study everything for Maimonides in order to get somewhere. Here, studying is out of the picture. You can do this through very daily, mundane actions, but there is a way to do them, and that's what they're going to teach us. Not the action, is the way you do it, right? Yes.
Do you say that you need the vision first before you can do the actions, or can the actions happen like on their own without a necessary vision?
I think, yeah, they don't need to work together necessarily. I'm thinking, right? I think you can do either one, and you get into a place of joy, right? So as you do these actions, by the way, you awaken joy within yourself, right? So that's the second thing they're going to teach. So remember, it's not the what, it's the how. It's not what you do. It doesn't have to be a commandment. It doesn't have to be a ritual. It can be any old action, but it's how you do it that's going to determine whether you release the divine through that action or not. Does that make sense? And of course, we're going to study what those actions are, right? Right now, I'm just keeping you in suspense. Yes.
I was just going to say.
An example. Yes. Let me think. Do I want to give you an example? No, we're going to wait till we do the text, because I want to keep you in suspense. So remember, it's not the what, but there is a way of doing this, any action, which will release the divine into the world. So now I'm leaving you in suspense. Right. So this is fundamental, right? And both of these, in a way, have to do with joy, have to do with opening, right? When you see the divine in the profane, you're seeing with a broader perspective, right? And when you're doing in a certain way, you're also opening up the world and releasing the divine, right? So, and we'll have to see, right? Why is joy the ultimate virtue for Hasidism, right? It's not repentance, right? It's not guilt. It's not, right? It's none of these religious virtues. They pick joy. And by the way, it can be completely profane joy. We have examples of them celebrating the peasants' joy. Not the Jewish peasants, the Polish peasants who have no clue, right? So this is just in itself, right? Not even religious joy, not even the joy you get from doing the right thing, right? Joy in itself is a direct path to God for the Hasidic, right? It's very interesting that they would come up with that in the middle of such existential darkness, right? And this darkness, by the way, will get more and more intense as you get into the 20th century. So they're already sensing, it's already covering the continent, right? It's beginning to cover the continent, and they are already fighting with this, right? With this, so we're gonna look at that also. It's gonna be slightly different, obviously, from Spinoza. Okay, now, I need to go deeper. Because where are they getting these ideas, right? This is not random, right? So let me give you a little bit of the background, the intellectual, mystical background of these rabbis that brought them to these ideas, right? So first of all, this idea that the world, right, that the holy hides in the world, that the divine hides in the world, that the divine is caught up in materiality, this is obviously not a Greek idea. We know this, right? The Greeks separate the two. Right? For the Greeks, the world is completely corrupt, and you have to get out of the world, right, to attain something more. And this is, by the way, the intellectual basis of idealism, right, which we are working against here with the existentialism, right? Idealism is this idea: I have to escape the world, rise above the world, despise the world, despise my body, control my passions, and then I will get in a higher sphere, right? So this idealism, which all the way from Plato to Hegel, right? And this is the movement that existentialism is fighting against, right? This idea that you have to move away from the world in order to connect to something absolute, something divine. This idea that the divine is in the world It's therefore not a Greek idea. It's not a Western idea. It is a biblical idea, right? And where does this idea first appear? In the biblical text, that the divine is caught up in the world. Not in the way they said, but a little different. Earliest mention of the divine being in the world. If you know your Bibles. Really?
I don't know the Bible well as well.
Isn't it from the beginning?
Where?
They call the garden
Yes, explain.
there, like one example.
Okay, good. And even before that, you can find. Do you remember
They
the?
created it, and
What did he say about it?
that the world was good. and,
Exactly.
and then the rest they don't know.
You got the whole shebang. Okay, good. Absolutely, right? God creates the world and doesn't say, ooh, ew, now that I created it, let me depart, right? No, it's good. This idea it's good, a Greek could never come up with that. This idea that the world is good is impossible to the Greek mind, right? You have to be a Hebrew mind to capture that. So this idea that the good is caught up in evil, that spirit is caught up in matter existed in the very beginning of the biblical text in the creation story, right? The way God is creating the world, number one is through his breath, his own words, right? So he's very much present, right, in the process, but also the way that he describes it as good, this is impossible to the Greek mind, right? So that idea is a very ancient idea that already existed in the biblical text, right? Now there's a more recent source for this, but dates back to there, certainly, yes.
Isn't breath like the most ephemeral thing? Like, isn't speech like the least active form of creation? How
Yeah,
are they reading in that it's the most, or that it's like a very active process?
the what?
But you were saying that like God is very active. In
Yes, I mean, we have to understand that the divine breath has nothing to do with our breath. When God speaks, it becomes, right? You have to know, it's interesting that in the Hebrew, the Hebrew word for language or word, right? Dava, it doesn't just mean word, it means event. Which means if God is speaking, it is so powerful that it immediately becomes something real, right? So our words, right? You say, yeah, I'll meet you tomorrow at 5 and you don't show up. That's our words, right? There is no substance to most of our words, right? So we have no clue. But when the divine is speaking, right, it immediately takes shape, right? So there's a very powerful breath here.
Yeah,
right?
it's certainly powerful. But the word that or the anthropomorphism that it's using is the one that for us is the most
Yeah.
removed.
But you didn't used to be like that. The word, your word meant, it's just now in the 21st century that we've lost this. But throughout the centuries, the human word was very powerful too, because you would say, I swear, or I make an oath, or, I have to keep my word, or I lose everything. It's gone now. We have no clue of this,
These
right?
are like lawyers. I mean, we didn't have this like formidable legal institution, right? So people based were neighbors and had these intimate relationships, and so you were like always talking.
Yeah, and your word was
Yeah.
real.
Yeah, it's definitely true that words were treated differently.
Yeah.
And at the same time, isn't it still true that actions for people are always going to be something that is more concrete than words?
What
Yeah.
about speech acts? How,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Bring it back to Austin.
Yes, let's do that. No, you're right. I mean, although to be honest, the word historically was deeply connected to the action, right? It is today that we've made the difference. And the word could be, like you said, a speech act, like a promise or a betrothal or a covenant. These are all, there's no, right? The substance is in the connection. The word can create a connection, which is as real as, the pot you made the other day, right? So,
Yeah, various spiritual traditions recommend that you maintain the sacredness of your word and you maintain the reality behind what you say. Because if you continuously take a habit of lying, you're inherently disempowering yourself because you're essentially concretizing that what you say isn't real, and you're actually weakening yourself when you don't treat your word as sacred. So
Exactly.
spiritual traditions
let's
do
hope that we
recommend-
have, right, this tradition for a while. Yes, we don't have to stay too long on this particular detail of the creation story. Yes.
Thinking, words are more powerful.
Okay.
So, you
Yeah.
can convince somebody to do an action that's ready to believe the thing you mentioned.
That's true. The words as you speak, which is why in Judaism, the speech is very highly monitored because the speech can create a reality. So you say to someone you're a dummy all their lives, they're going to become a dummy, right? You say you're amazing, they're going to be. So the word does have tremendous power. That's why there's many rules concerning the speech, right? Great. All right. Thank you for that little interlude. Philosophy of language. Back to the creation story. So, but beyond the creation story, the most immediate influence is the mystical writings of Judaism, which I'm going to talk about now. So the mystical writings of Judaism, it begins around Middle Ages, right? And we have to understand this body of work, which I have spared you because I was gonna do it and then I just couldn't find my way through the actual primary text. So we're not doing those. Besides, they haven't been translated and it's a mess. But I'm going to talk about them right now, right? So because these rabbis, they were studying those works and they were influenced by those works. And so we have to have some knowledge of them to really understand what they're doing here. So the mystical writings are compiled under the Hebrew word Kabbalah, which literally means, I guess, to receive, or you could say revelation, right? A revelation that you received. So these are texts that arose from visions that some of the Hebrew sages, Jewish sages were having during the Middle Ages, and mostly concentrated, the sages that were having these visions were in Spain. It's interesting, right? It started in Spain, and there are reasons for that, right? What was going on in Spain in the Middle Ages? Anybody know?
The Inquisition.
Yes, right? It's a very dark time,
The
especially.
Reconquista.
Very good, right? Especially for the Jewish community. This was a time when it was as dark as where we are now here, right? With the Hasidic movement. And so these are sages that started to have intuitions of a deeper reality, right? Usually happens psychologically. We know that when the world is about to come to an end, there are a lot of visions, right? So to keep the community together. So the first person to have these visions, right, was from Spain, and he started to write, and he didn't write so much as his disciples compiled what he was saying and so forth. And you have many, many rabbis who then built on this tradition, right?
Who is this?
I forgot. He's very well known. What is he? Who is he?
I think about the Zohar.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh my God. So I'm about to talk about Luria. He's in Israel, but this guy was in Spain. God, y'all don't know? I can't.
I'm not Jewish.
Somebody Google for me right now because I want to know too. Gosh, I didn't even write it down in my notes. I was going to talk about it. Cordovero? Is that him? It was a Moshe something. Okay, thank you. Let us know. We are all dying to know now.
Ben Yochai.
Who?
That's what they attributed.
That's the attributed, yeah. Sorry? No, not him. It has a C in it, right? Is that it? Cordo what? When you Google the rest of this name? Yeah, let me try it. Everybody on their phone. Origins of Kabbalah.
Yeah, Moses de Leon,
That's it? There's nothing more? There's no C?
1242. 1305.
Writer of Kabbalah. Why is this so hard to find?
I just went onto the Wikipedia.
Yeah, I'm in the Zohar. Oh, Moses de Leon. Where's this Cordovero guy that I'm talking about then? Oh my God, this is all gonna be on YouTube.
Google sucks these days.
Display my ignorance in
Getting
public.
worse and worse.
Okay, Moses de Leon. We're gonna go with that name.
Is that the right name?
Google is terrible.
Because it's irrelevant for us. We're not going to learn this person. 14th century, around. give and take 1 or 2 centuries. Okay, so anyways, these mystical writings are popping up, right, in Spain. And then you have, of course, a little later, the one we're going to study, which is Isaac Luria, right? He's familiar with these writings, he's building on these writings, and he's exactly 1534 to 1572. I'll talk a little bit about him and his main philosophy, because this is the philosophy which inspired the Hasidic rabbis, right? So we have to understand him very well. So Isaac Luria, born in Jerusalem, right? So he's, of course, these writings are traveling, right? They're going on caravans, right? And being spread throughout the empire, which at the time, let's see, who had conquered Jerusalem in the 16th century?
The Ottomans, maybe?
Is it okay? Are we there? Okay. All right. Thank you. So this is that time, right? And so everything is circulating. He's able to get his hand on these writings, and he's going to build on them. But a few words about his life, right? So he's born in Jerusalem. It is a funny story. I find it interesting. It's a legend, of course, that his father, before having him, right, he had a vision from the prophet Elijah. That's a significant detail, telling him that his son would be a great master, right? That he would be born to him very soon, and that he would, he said it like this, he would redeem many sparks from the world. We're going to talk about these sparks in a second, right? And so indeed, right, this boy is born, and he's, intuitive, he's very profound mind, right? And he gets he gets married. He loses father, he becomes an orphan very young, and then he gets married to a very wealthy cousin of his, right? And cousin, it was normal at the time, don't get shocked. It was normal at the time to marry your cousin. So he marries his cousin, but then almost immediately, because he's such a mystic, right? He withdraws into solitude, and he goes and builds himself a shelter on the banks of the Nile River. So he goes all the way down there, right? And he's there during the week, and then he comes home on the weekends for the Sabbath, right? To spend time with his wife. And even when he's with his wife, he doesn't talk. Imagine a husband like that. As long as he does other things. Anyways, he doesn't talk to her. And then he goes back into his solitude, right? So this is that's kind of the person he was, right? And so eventually, right, he comes back to Palestine at the time, and he goes and he moves to the north to a village called Safed. And this is where he will really profess and build his own following and so forth. And of course, his writings will be compiled by his students, right? Maybe the Cordovero is a student of his. I know there's that name in my head. Okay, so you get an idea. Now here's the story that he's going to begin. He's going to turn back to the story of Genesis, right? The story of the creation of the world, and he's going to retell it, right? In other words, what he's doing, what he believes he's doing, is giving us the more profound meaning of the text, right? The Kabbalists believe that there's the text, and then there's a deeper hidden meaning. And so when he's going to retell the story of creation, he's going to reveal the deeper hidden meaning that is caught or trapped in the text. Do you follow? So that's the idea, right? So they believe, yes, there is a biblical text, which is often just a historical or legal document. It tells, what we should do, what happened, and so forth. But they say there is also a very deeper mystical meaning that we can tap into if we have the right vision, right? Back to the idea of vision. And so that's what he does. He retells the story of the creation of the world. And here's how it goes. I'm going to tell you this story now so that you can see the elements of that story here in the Hasidic rabbis' teachings. So in the beginning, he says, so make sure you jot down the main ideas, right? Because this will come up over and over again in their writings. In the beginning, God was so powerful. His light was so powerful that he covered the whole world, right? And it makes sense. When you turn on the light, there's no room for darkness. Darkness immediately recedes, right? So he had such a powerful light that he covered the whole world. But then he wanted to create a world, but he knew, as long as I'm taking the whole space, there can be nothing but me. And so what he did is he contracted his light. There's a lot of very powerful lessons just in that. In a movement called contraction, or in the Hebrew, it seems to. I'm writing it down. It contracts his light, and now the world is filled with darkness, right? Because he has to contract. So in this darkness, he will create our world, right? Now that he has left the space is open. There's room for something more, right? By the way, ethics, so much there in terms of ethics, right? That in order for there to be another, you have to contract, right? If you fill the whole space, there's no room for another. You have to take a step back in order to allow for. There's a lot here that you can riff off of this idea forever in terms of ethics, right? So that's a very interesting idea in itself, right? So now there's darkness, and he wants now to create. And so he's going to send his light, but not all of it. He's going to send it in a way packaged in vessels, right? So wrapped up. He wraps up his light, because if the light is too powerful, remember, then it's all God again. So he has to wrap up his light, right, in vessels, and he sends it like ships in the sea, right, to this area of darkness. And with these vessels of light, these little parcels of divine light, he's hoping to create the universe, which will then be a blend of darkness and light, right? So he's trying, this is the energy he sends into the darkness so that the world can become created, right? The problem is, so you got this, right? You got that he can't send his light raw form, right? Because then it'll cover the whole universe again. So he wraps it up in vessels. And then he sends it like ships in the sea, right, into this dark realm, right, which will become our world. Now, the problem is his light is so powerful, breaks those vessels, right? And now the vessels are shattered. And what happens is the light hangs onto the vessel. So hangs onto these pieces of vessel that are now exploded throughout the world, cover the universe, right? And on each of these little shards of the vessel, there's a little bit of light that has stuck onto it. So the light is not left there. The light clings to the vessel. And as the vessel shatters, the light is sent with the shattered vessel into the world. And that is how our world now became created, right? Our world is therefore made up of these broken vessels on which the light is still clinging, right? So that's the story. So
Makes
these
sense to me.
not this. I mean, if you study quantum physics or the Big Bang, right? There's a lot of elements that are very similar to what the physics, right, will discover, right? These are interesting intuitions, right? I think so. There's an explosion, right? There's a light. So now our world basically is filled with these little pieces of vessels and these little pieces of light that are clinging to the vessels. And so these pieces, right, of these shards, is that how you say it, a shard?
Yes.
These shards that are now, right, throughout the world, right, they have exploded, they're covering the earth on which the light is clinging. In the Hebrew, is called klipot. Very important word. Klipot means simply those shards. So these are the shards in the world, spread everywhere, hiding where the light is still clinging, right? And so what the Luria is saying is that the world is filled with lost sparks of light that are clinging to the shards or the klipot. And so to access the light, you have to go through the klipot. You have to get to the shards. So we'll talk about what that means in a second. It's just the story, right? Let me see if I missed anything. Okay, so now what is our duty as human beings? What is our purpose? It is to go into the world and gather these broken shards, right? And bring them together again and unite the light again. And when we have done this, our world will be redeemed. That's the beautiful story that he weaves, right, from the elements of creation. So let me say that again, right? The last thing that needs to be done now that the light is completely cast, right? The light has exploded and is hiding in the materiality of the world. Our task now is to enter this materiality and to find these lost sparks and detach them from the shard in order to recreate the light and perfect or repair our universe. And the word for repair, another technical term, very important, is olam, which means the
I've heard that
repair.
before.
Yeah, it's a very famous word, right? It means the repair of the world, tikkun olam. So that is the goal of every human being, right? Is to go and find these lost sparks, gather them up again, and so forth. So, so that's the story. So it's a very interesting story because it sounds like complete science fiction, but it's actually very profound philosophically, right? What do we learn first about gathering the light? What do we have to do in order to find the light in the world? What's the first thing we got to do?
Find the shattered vessels.
Exactly. You can't find the light unless you go through matter. This is very interesting. Again, this notion, you have to enter the world. You have to get your hands dirty. You have to move through materiality if you're going to access the light. And so there is a way that we have to enter the world, which will release that light. Now you're starting to see the connections with the Hasidic writings, right? Hasidism is saying we need to enter the world. Basically, that's what they're saying. First of all, right, the ability to see the holy is the ability to see within materiality those sparks, right? Now I'm connecting the two, right? So back here, right? So Hasidism says, first thing we need, vision, to realize that the sparks are hidden. We need to start to see those sparks, and we need to start to, just seeing them is enough, right? But then we also have to draw them out, right? We have to draw the sparks out. And the way we draw them out is not by leaving the world, is by entering the world, right? So this is why they say the most profane deed, as you're going about material business, you're doing stuff in the material realm, you can draw out those sparks. But first you have to enter the material, right? So then there's the very opposite from the Greek mystical mindset, which is you separate from the world. Greek mystical mindset, which then Christianity adopted, right, with the monastic culture. You have to withdraw from the world to connect to the divine. In this, the Jewish mysticism is the opposite. You have to enter the world deeply in order to connect to the divine. Do you see that it's opposite mystical mindset, right? It's very striking. The way that mysticism in the Greek and the Christian tradition moves us away from the world, here the mystical tradition moves us more deeply into the world. We have a task to accomplish in matter, and we have to grapple with matter in order to release these sparks, right? And of course, we're going to learn how, right? What can we do to release these sparks, and in a way to release God, right? In a way, all of what this is saying, everything, is that in a way God has become captive in the world, and we have to release his power. We have to release his light. We have to release his presence, right? That's what this, God is not sitting on a throne somewhere in the fifth, what do you call it? Galaxy, or I don't know. What are these levels? Yeah, something like that. Yeah, he's not sitting somewhere up there, right? God, in a way, has become, through this very risque act of creation, has become trapped in the world, right? It was a huge risk he took by sharing, right? By sharing his light and by releasing his light. And now his light is trapped. So in a way, God is trapped, right? God is trapped in the world, and it is our duty to release him and to release thereby his light and his power, and thereby transfigure the world, right? So yes.
So, so God is trapped or bound in the world, in this materiality of to find how division, recognize him, release him. But then we would do this by entering into this materiality. So we're going to be entrenched in materiality
Yes.
to release something that is supposed to be transcendental, right? But
Yes.
we're going to drop this entire venture, even after his transcendence. We're always staying in materiality, or do we also participate in transcendence?
So when you release, right,
Yeah.
we stay material. The Jewish mindset is never going to leave your humanity. You will always remain clay, right? But we have the power to release within ourselves and within the world, also within ourselves, right? And joy might be that release, perhaps,
So
right?
so we don't become, so maybe this is where the mysticism
So it's
comes
trapped
in,
within
right?
us too. I guess you could say it like that.
Right.
These sparks are also trapped within us, and we have the power to release them
So
within
we're
us.
not transcendental beings, but we can participate in transcendence through acts like
We
joy.
already do. The sparks are already there.
Okay,
right?
so then we're not entirely material.
No.
We're not entirely.
No, but it's dormant. So
It's dormant.
so we can live a complete life, completely materialistic, and never release those sparks, right? So, but we can then also release those sparks within ourselves, and perhaps this is where joy comes in, means that you have released. Once the joy is released in you, you have done something to release those sparks within yourself, right? So now you are partaking in the divine joy or the divine light or whatever. Yes.
As a consequence of the earlier part of the story, doesn't that mean we'll fade away immediately?
What do you mean?
Because God will take up all the space again.
No, Woo, okay, I hadn't thought of that. Let me think. So now remember, it's not all of his light, right? He sent a little bit of his light. Just enough, right? So it will be just enough to redeem the world, but we will not be overwhelmed by the light because he's still over here. It's like this, right? He's like, he has withdrawn. That's God. That's the world. Looks like the Tai Chi. Messed up version of the Tai Chi sign. And then so he sends little parcels of light, right? But it's not all of him. If it was, it would really be messed. It's just enough to create, right? But except they got broken in the process, and now we're dealing with God being trapped in the universe. Yes. Other questions? No. Okay. Good. Yes.
If he's sending, I'm so sorry, I'm trying to understand this. If it looks like that and he's sending in a little bit of light, then how is he trapped? If it's only a little bit of himself. and not
But that little bit is trapped. Well, God in our world is trapped. This God, we're never gonna have access. Forget it. Like, but we can have access here, right? So this is Spinoza, right? Spinoza was saying that too. God has two attributes, matter and mind, but he's much more than that, right? So God is known within this world through matter and mind, but the whole rest of God, we will never have access, right? So the only God we have access is the God that traveled in the vessels, right? So when I say God is trapped, I'm saying, yes, that part of God is trapped. Right? No, God himself obviously is completely different dimension also, right? He's part of him is here, part of him is out there. And this is why a lot of the Kabbalists would say, God has been broken into, and you have the female version of God in this world, and the male version of God is waiting over here. And so the goal is to unite them. So they have this whole, beautiful theory of, uniting God to himself, the female and the male.
In the story, is God infinite also?
So yeah, so you have if you want to go deeper, you have a male God here that we don't have access to, but here the God that is trapped in the world is the female part of God. And so this God is trapped, and we have to release her. And when we do, she's able to reunite with her male counterpart, is very erotic, right, writings. And then you have, right, the Messianic era, the salvation of the world. Even God is saved because you reunite him with himself. That's the deeper version, which.
And both these gods are infinite.
Yeah, there's the same thing. It's not two gods, it's one God,
One
split.
God, you're infinite. But
Yeah.
then it wouldn't matter. Then there's no trapping because God is infinite. So
In
how
here, we want, for our sake, we redeem him, right? Even for, you can say even for his sake, imagine you were married happily and your partner is now exiled. Do you feel whole? You're lost.
Well, my partner's infinite, then he's never in exile because he's infinite.
Okay,
He's
so
around
then
me.
don't think of it like that. Don't think of it like
He's
that.
infinite, right? He's not bound.
Don't think of it like that.
But he doesn't have to be. That's the point of infinity.
Don't worry about it. Don't use that concept. It's not going to help you. Don't think of God as infinite then.
Okay, so then
Yeah, think of God simply has been separated from his most beloved part, right? And now he himself is suffering. She is suffering. And in a way, not only we redeem ourselves, but we redeem God when we gather the sparks. That's the powerful idea also in the Kabbalistic writings, is that God needs saving. By the way, these ideas, I'm throwing them, you'll find them in Levinas and Buber. Levinas, if you recall, Levinas talks about saving God through ethics, right? We're going to talk about that. So I'm just paving, right? These are beautiful stories, but they're going to be, you will see them reenacted philosophically by these writers, right? Who are complete secular, who have a completely secular approach. That's why I'm telling you these stories, because they have nourished these minds, right? So the idea that God needs saving, I want you to write it down, because you'll see this again. We will meet this idea again when we do Levinas, that God needs saving. God has been split from himself. His female, consort, right? If you want to use these terms, is in exile in the world, is lost and trapped in the. By the way, if you study these, the Hindu texts, it's. I went to one of those festivals, and they have this story. I hope I remember the names of these two gods. Rama, I think it was, who lost his, anybody know this? Somebody.
Oh, the Ramayana.
Who lost his
Sita,
wife.
I believe is
Is that-
name.
yeah,
I
he
believe.
lost his wife and she was possessed, she was taken away by
Yes,
demons.
Rakshasas,
And he had to go
yes.
and fight for her, right? Very similar, right, drama here, right? The female god, the female part of God is trapped in the universe, and we are the knights in shining armor, which can, right, in a way, gather her, and through our certain deeds, right, we can reunite them, right,
Yeah.
and in a way redeem God and save God
The
himself. Right?
damsel of distress trope is a common thing. There are
Exactly.
sorts of things.
In the Eastern traditions,
It's
you have.
extended
This
now
is a
to,
no-brainer for the Easterners. They're like, yeah, duh. Okay, so this is new for us Westerners. But if you have an Eastern background, you're like, yeah, obviously, yes, that makes total sense, right? So that's the thing, right? So we have to realize there's few key elements here that I want you to jot down: the redeeming of God, the fact that we empower God, right? That God needs us to release Him. To release his power. God is bound until we do something. We will see this in Levinas very powerfully when we talk about the Holocaust, the binding of God during the Holocaust and why God was not released, right? What happened? So these ideas are going to come back, that God is bound and we are the only ones who can unbind him or unbind his power. So same idea here, God is trapped, or at least to be more precise, the female part of God is trapped, and only we can release her, right? Yes.
So in this view of God, is there any idea of like divine, I guess, like intervention? Like does God interact with the world besides for like on these pieces of shards?
So yes, when we release the power of God, then God can act again, right?
Like
Then you have
ultimately or in every day?
in every day, that's when you have miracles. That's when you have, amazing moments of revelation. That's when you have peace or reconciliation or healing. So these things we can, but first we have to release that power, and then yes, you have these daily miracles, right? And just for those of you who want more technical terms, the female part of God is called the Shekhinah. So you might have encountered, these are common, a lot of people know these words, right? But these are the technical words that go with this. So yes, once you release God, right, through certain actions, you then encounter miracles and, unusual reconciliations or moments where you don't expect peace, right? And so forth, and healing and so forth. But it is really up to us to release those sparks through what we're going to study, those certain actions. It's not particular actions, is through a way of inhabiting the world, a way of dwelling in the world is going to release those sparks. So now you have the backdrop, right? Yes.
Are these thinkers like saying that like Judaism originally was like all along had this idea, or are they like proposing?
No, they say this is the hidden meaning of the book of creation, right? So and they the whole Kabbalistic writings, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're saying this is the text, but then there's a deeper layer, and we are now unveiling it, right? So everything they're saying is actually not at all contradictory, right, with the actual surface text, right, literal text. But they're saying we are sensing the deeper meaning. We have been given access now, right, to this deeper revelation. So any questions? Is this all? You got the gist? Yes.
Just explain the time Bible calling God that we have to read God.
They say God has split. And the way they describe it to show that this is a piece, this is suffering for God, this is hard for God, is to simply see it in terms of a male-female couple, right? A spousal relationship. So they imagine God as a male who has lost his spouse. And now his spouse is trapped. And of course, this is all images. It's not, I don't think they believe God is sitting up there with the spouse, right? So it's not to be taken literally. These are metaphors in order to understand that God in a way is suffering. God is in exile. He's not sitting there smugly, putting things in a book, right? No, he's actually torn. He is himself wandering around with the people and suffering alongside them. These are all images to describe the pain and the trauma of God that occurred when we sinned and so forth, right? So I don't think they meant for it to be taken literally, right? But this is to help us understand what's happening in the psyche of God, right? Okay, any other questions? Okay, quick words on the two rabbis we're going to study. I put the reading assignment in Blackboard, so now you know what to read. We're going to study two rabbis. The first one is called the Baal Shem Tov. And the second one is called the Seer of Lublin. These are the two guys we're going to study. So the first reading will be the stories about the Baal Shem Tov, and the second one are stories about the Seer of Lublin. None of them wrote anything. These are just stories that the disciples compiled about them around their teachings and so forth. Can I have 1 minute to talk about the Baal Shem Tov? Please, thank you. Okay. So Baal Shem Tov, 1698, 1760. So you have an idea of the dates. Seer of Lublin is a little further, 1745, 1815. Yeah. We have more information on the Baal Shem Tov, so I'll give you some outline of who he is briefly. It's very short, don't worry. And then just a little bit on the Seer of Lublin. So basically, Baal Shem Tov, I wish I could say more. Maybe I should save it for next time. Should I save it for next time, the biography, or you want it now before you read?
Go into more detail next time.
Can I go now, like, for 2 minutes? 2.5 minutes? I can do this in 2 minutes. I totally can.
You can do anything you want.
I love that. Thank you. Okay, so he orphaned, right, when he was young. He used to be, it's interesting, he used to go to this Hebrew school, right, in the morning, and then in the afternoon he would rush to the woods. Like, it's like he couldn't stand to be in a classroom, right? So he was always in the woods. He married, his first marriage was really young. He was 16 years old. And then his wife died. He was, well, at least it wasn't like he was 20 and she was 16. They were both 16. So his wife died early. So he just threw himself in his studies. He studied Kabbalah, obviously. And then he took, his first job was to bring kids to Hebrew school. So he would, I mean, they lived far, they were peasants, right? So he would walk with them to Hebrew school. And on the way, he would teach them how to sing the prayers. He was a very kind of poetic person. Then there's a saying about him that if the Bible or if the Torah could be kissed, like he used to kiss those children, you know, when they left, I mean, you know, the Messiah would return. Right? So he was just so very affectionate, right, with his kids. Later, he remarries, becomes, you know, a community leader. But then he's interesting. He does an agrarian reform. So he realizes we are in such poverty. Let's become, you know, good at this. So he really encourages the peasants to grow their own food, to become self-sufficient and so forth. So you can see he was, you know, very grounded person, right? While at the same time being a very powerful mystic, right? He also, you know, he said that he was able to achieve union with God, right? Which was unusual in Judaism, like that's not a thing, right? God is supposed to be very separate and holy, but he actually achieved actual union with God. And then, of course, out of this connection, he became very intuitive, very almost psychic. He could read the souls of people, right? It was said that he could read your soul down to the end. And then he could also heal, although he relied on folk remedies also for that. So that's kind of giving you a vision, right, of the kind of people we're dealing with. And of course, the first text we're going to study will be around him. The other guy, there's not much on him, is very similar, also can read people's souls, right? That's why he's called the seer, right? He could do more though. He was able to repair those souls, right? One encounter with him and you would leave in a way forgiven, right? You could say he was capable of, he had the power to forgive sins, right? He had the power to heal your sin-sick soul, right? To repair the soul. So you can see these are very unusual characters. The traditional rabbis look down on them because they were so I mean, out there with their stuff about union with God and healing practices. So they're not usual characters, but they grew very powerful and very influential, and we're going to study their stories. So enjoy and begin to try to interpret those stories. All these stories have meaning. They're not just stories. And we'll study them together in class.